Hello again, and welcome to another of Mosaic's coffee breaks. Mosaic is, of course, a collaboration of the organisations shown at the front of this presentation, and that collaboration focuses very much on the ownership issues associated with mid-market law firms. And when we say ownership, we mean everything associated with ownership, mergers and acquisitions, partnership structures, succession planning, partner exits, and everything associated with all of those issues. I hope you enjoy this broadcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Mosaic coffee break. Today, we're joined by Paul McCluskey of Gemstone Legal. Some of you will remember him from his time as a well-known figure in the banking sector for our industry. And I'm pleased to see we've got the entire Mosaic crew here today. So good morning to everybody. And Paul,
good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
It's great to see. I haven't seen you for a good while. I think I saw the back of your head at the Lawnet Awards back in November, but that's about as close as we've got to chatting in recent past. So for this chat, Paul, we'd like to persuade you to help us test the bank's appetite for lending to this sector at the moment, across the various structures that are used and the various sizes of firm. And obviously, we know that you don't work for a bank any longer, but I dare say your finger's much more on the pulse than that of the rest of us.
It definitely helps by not working for one particular bank, isn't it? Where, beforehand it was 16 years working with Bank of Scotland and Lloyds. Good thing now, I guess, is you get to spread across the high street banks and secondary funders for funding, and all the banks that look at client deposits, so stretching across a much wider, much broader range.
And Paul, would you say that, as a broad statement, that the banks are still interested in the legal sector? Do you think that it is a sector that they still focus on?
It's interesting. It's a great question, Tom, because if you look at the marketing website, or you look at the websites for any of the banks, they'll all have their legal sector offering. You talk to any law firm that has a banking connection, i.e. all of them, and the opinion's very different, isn't it? So, the feeling out there is that banks have dumped the legal sector. Smaller law firms have been pushed into the call center environment. They're left, just without it's almost like a faceless relationship, I guess, with their bank. Some of them find it very difficult, certainly no proactive conversations going on, which provides opportunities for people like me to talk to firms about their finance, their banking, their funding. But yeah, it's tough out there. Some firms have a great relationship because their relationship manager might know the sector, but of course, as some of the older guys have maybe taken a package, retired, moved on, whatever the reason, then it's a mixed feeling, I'd say.
The ones that I see, and you might disagree with me, Paul, the ones that I see as having still a sector specialism are NatWest and Barclays, who do still seem to have the largest market share. But even they not desperately keen to lend in the sector.
No, exactly. I mean, NatWest and Barclays traditionally, 22-23% of the market. Lloyds will have about 18% of the market. The other banks make up the rest. It's a mixed bag, Howard. Some firms have a great relationship, as I said before, but when firms come to me and talk about, let's say they were a Barclays client and the bank with Barclays and have an unhappy relationship, and they might want to think about moving. To me, I say to them, think about the individual. So the relationship normally sits with the strength of that relationship manager. So they could leave Barclays, they could go to NatWest or Lloyds, but 6 months later they find they have a new relationship manager that doesn't understand the sector, and they have that same feeling all over again. So a large part is the online system, isn't it? It's the relationship with the online processes that particular bank offers, and how easy the bank is to deal with.
Does it help to have an intermediary, an accountant in particular, in between when dealing with the banks, or is it easy, just as easy for the lawyers to go direct to their bankers?
Yeah, it should. You would think that it should be really simple for the lawyer to go directly to their bank. I'm an FD at a non-league football club, so slightly change the subject. But so I personally bank with Lloyds for my business. The football club that I help out, they bank with Barclays, and this experience when I talk to law firms that bank with Barclays is pretty similar. But if you ever have to phone them and you could be 10 minutes dialing, the phone's ringing out for 10 minutes to get through. Now, you think if you were a cashier within a legal practice and you need to figure out a transaction narrative on an account so you can release some funds, for example, and you have to spend 10 minutes dialing the bank every time you want to know something, and that's a waste of a lot of time, right? And it's awful. And so I just think it's the offering has gone. I would say is not where it once was.
Or you said the feeling is the banks are not as keen on law firms these days. What do you think lies behind that?
I think that at one point there used to be a great reliance on client money, and so banks would certainly quote their law firm customers to have a slug off that client money, whether that was a primary banking or secondary banking. To me, that's changed. Perhaps funding for banks is easier in the wholesale markets, and so there's a less reliance on the client money side of it. I mean, it's the only thing I can really put it down to. Also, Barry, where beforehand you had teams that they had sector purity, if you like. You had a relationship manager that perhaps had 50 law firms in their portfolios, or if there were larger law firms, it might have been a smaller amount. But let's say they had 30 odd law firms in their portfolios. So there's more conversations. They're hearing more about what's going on in the market. They're more attuned to try and help their clients. As the client base is split up, and the conversation just start to die because of that. And that's, you look at the interest rates, banks are on bespoke pricing for deposits. Standard pricing on banks, they'll top out about 1.96%, for example, the big four high street banks. But for bespoke pricing, if you have a relationship manager that's proactive, they'll stretch that, they'll go higher. But of course, you need to have that conversation with your bank manager in the first place. And if the bank's not reaching out to you and you phone the bank in and it's difficult to get through to a relationship manager because they're dealing with other types of business or other types of queries, then it leaves you disadvantaged.
What about structures in terms of LLPs, limited companies? Does that make a difference to lending decisions?
Certainly does to the bank's appetite. You think back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, for example, where banks would easily lend to limited companies. So think about the partnership model. So partner, director, stepping up, about to take an equity stake within the business. If that's within an incorporated business or a limited company, none of the high street banks have a product for that. And so what they'll ask that individual to do is to remortgage, which is, might be a simple answer. However, the other half might not be too keen on you remortgaging the house in order to put a stake into a legal practice. There are secondary funders that are out there that will do it, but they'll only take the funding over 7 years, Howard, is the longest. So if you're asked to buy into a law firm for £150,000, but you need to take that debt over a 7-year period, the monthly outgoings is really high. Where if you're an LLP and you're just taking a stake within a traditional partnership, so to speak, you might be able to stretch that funding over 15, 20 years, much longer period of time. So it becomes more affordable and more manageable. So it's a real problem in the sector just now.
So you tend to prefer LLPs, do you? As I know Mark and I do, tend to on average.
I do, yeah. So
Tom and I have argued over this over many years, in a very friendly manner, I should add.
So I'm an independent finance broker, have access to, I don't know, you've got access to 100 funders, but in real terms, that's, let's say you're talking about 15 funders that are focusing on the legal sector. Every one of them would prefer to lend to a non-incorporated business. So an LLP, perhaps from that point of view, traditional partnership, sole trader. As soon as it moves to a limited company, then there's just complexities in the funders offering.
You mentioned term, term of loans to partners.
Yeah.
What about typical interest rates you're seeing?
It'll vary. 7% flat, I guess, is probably a good indication. It used to be the point that secondary funders were far outside of the bank's offering. Lloyds are still very, very good at their interest rates. Traditionally, the high street, the big four, they offer fantastic rates on funding. It's the appetite. So you need to bank with that bank for a kickoff. If you're at the top end of your overdraft, perhaps there's less of an appetite to further lend to you. That then pushes firms out into the secondary market. Clearly, the best way for a law firm to finance themselves is to collect fees. The old release some lockup. That's probably the easiest way for them to do it. But it's a real challenge for law firms to keep working capital going. And the banks don't like lending for any firm that wants to borrow for VAT, for example. It's just not a product that they want to look at.
Fascinating. Mark, Tom, is there anything else that you'd like to put to Paul? Because I think we're coming towards the end of this particular coffee break.
No, that all makes perfect sense. And the fact that Paul supports my views on LLPs, I'm just very happy about, Nigel.
Very good. Well, as ever, I think it's been a real treat for us listening to an industry expert. So thank you very much, Paul, for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next call.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, everyone.